All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. This video comes from Forbes Breaking News and it's titled, "Do you need an ID to rent an apartment? Nancy Mace asks witness rapid fire questions about ID." Now, if you've been in this space for a while, you know that voter ID is one of the left's biggest attacks and claims against Republicans, against conservatives, against the right. They'll say that, voter ID in Texas or in North Carolina or, wherever, in Virginia, they'll say that it's racist. But voter ID just requires that you need to have an ID to vote. And prior to the 2020 election, I didn't even really notice too much or care too much about voter ID. I understood that I needed an ID to vote, but now I'm very much for strong ID laws because, the 2020 election has some very questionable things going on there. And I think every election does. And, that's just one of the ways that we help keep it a safe election, and that we know that, whoever's voting is voting correctly based off their ID. No problems there for me. All right. But a lot of people do have a problem with it. But we're about to get into this. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe while we're watching. Now let's roll it.
Minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Ms. Thompson. I was a state lawmaker for 3 years before I came to Congress. I represent the 1st Congressional District of South Carolina, and South Carolina has had its own history, very bad history with black South Carolinians, black and brown and African Americans. I recently took a vote to move statues like Supreme Court Justice Taney, removing his bust out of the Capitol Rotunda because he wrote the Dred Scott opinion, the one that said that black and brown and African Americans could not become citizens of the United States of America. I voted to move, someone like Wade Hampton, who encouraged the murder of over 150 black South Carolinians during his run for governor. And so I appreciate your comments about the 60s. I was not around then, but I've watched and read a lot of the history and seen the videos and seen the moments of violence against black America. So I applaud your work on that. My understanding is you were elected in 1972 in Texas. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right, and I applaud you for making history, I imagine, in Texas and being a strong voice for black men and black women. Coming from South Carolina, we've got voter ID.
Now, before we continue, I will say I like the fact that Representative Mace, Miss Mace, she stopped to acknowledge the credentials of Representative Thomas. I don't think she needed to do that, but maybe she felt compelled to do so, and it seemed very genuine. It didn't seem like she was just talking out of her behind. It seems like, she really means it. But they're about to get to the voter ID part, which is what I want to hear. So let's go.
Carolina, we've got voter ID. And I'm assuming Texas is the same way. Do y'all need IDs to buy alcohol when you're purchasing at the store?
Yes, to be sure that you are capable of doing that.
Right. Do you need an ID in Texas to buy cigarettes?
You can't buy them unless you're at least 21.
But do you have to show an ID to buy cigarettes?
You have to show an ID.
Do you need an ID when you're getting a job and trying to get on payroll in Texas?
Yes.
Do you need an ID to go to the pharmacy and get a prescription in Texas?
It depends on the prescription.
But do you need an ID for some prescriptions in
Yes, you
Texas?
do. Yes.
Do you need an ID to get Social Security services in Texas?
You do.
Do you need an ID to rent an apartment in Texas?
Yes.
Do you need an ID if you're going to buy a house and finance it via a mortgage in Texas?
Yes.
Do you need an ID in Texas if you're going to board an aircraft and fly commercial?
Yes.
Did you fly commercial or fly a private jet on the way to D.C.?
A chartered plane.
Do you have to show an ID when you fly in a private charter jet?
Yes.
I wouldn't know. I've never flown on one.
Thomas got that money, huh? She chartering private jets. But yeah, I think Representative Thomas knows exactly where Miss Mace is leading her down with this line of questioning. But if you need an ID to do all of these things, why wouldn't you need an ID to go and vote? Why? Why wouldn't you? It's just common sense. We want to make sure when we see that vote cast that we can tie that ID to it. We know who's really voting. It makes perfect sense. But like I said, if you've been in this space, I haven't been in this space for too long, but you know that voter ID is one of the biggest claims that the left throws against the right, against conservatives, against Republicans, to prove that Republicans are racist.
So did you need an ID to get in the building here today?
Yes.
Do you need an ID in Texas to open a bank account?
Yes.
To cash your check if you're working. Do you know, Representative Thompson, what percentage of blacks in Texas, black and brown African Americans, are registered to vote?
Oh, a huge percentage.
70%. Do you know what percentage of African Americans, black and brown Texans, have voted on average or in the last election?
About 64%.
Correct. Do you know how many whites are registered to vote in Texas?
Far more than African Americans.
72%. You have 70% of blacks in Texas who are registered to vote. You have 72% of whites in Texas who are
So in terms of percentiles, I mean, they're very close.
registered to vote. Do you know the percentage of whites who turned out to vote in recent elections?
I want to say over 50-some%.
65%. Yeah. Do you know what percentage of Hispanics are registered to vote in Texas?
No, I do not.
63%. Do you know what percentage of Hispanics voted in the last election?
I think it was over 40%.
53%. Hispanics are not voting in as high a numbers as blacks and whites in Texas. Do you know the percentage of Democrats that support voter ID?
Would you repeat your
Do
question?
you know the number or percentage of Democrats who support voter ID in this country?
I do not, but I don't think it's a whole lot.
72%. Do you know the number of black and brown and African Americans in this country who support voter ID?
No.
75%. Do you know the number of Hispanics that support voter ID in this country?
No.
81%. Do you know where the state of Texas is ranked with black voter turnout in this country?
Would black voters turn out?
Mm-hmm. Do you know where Texas is ranked?
Oh, 44%?
The latest numbers that I read this morning was that Texas is ranked 10th. Do you know where Texas is ranked? So then top 10 in the country. Do you know where Texas is ranked with women voters?
Oh, way up in the 50s.
In the bottom third of this country. So I would argue that Texas has a more difficult problem with getting women out to vote than black and brown and African Americans. Thank you, and I yield back.
That was nice. I love her line of question. I didn't know exactly where she was going after she started, her second round of questions, but it all makes sense. And this is one of those issues where I think you need to use your own judgment rather than the judgment of some black leader telling you that voter ID is racist. All of these stats that all of these stats that Miss Mace brought up, Representative Thomas didn't even really have a handle on or really know. She didn't even know this stuff. And Miss Mace isn't even from Texas, and she knows this information better than Representative Thomas, who is a representative of Texas. If you need an ID to do all of the things listed and discussed in this video, it makes absolutely no sense why you wouldn't need an ID to go and cast a vote. This is one of those narratives that's been going and hasn't been dispelled yet because, although, like she just said here, 70-something% of black Americans support voter ID. I don't know if she said black Texans or black Americans, but let's just say it was Texans. 70% of Texans are for voter ID. Then, if that's the case, you need to, disconnect from what the black leaders or black leadership is telling you and just, follow what you know is right. You know that if you need to have your ID to buy cigarettes, alcohol, purchase homes, rent an apartment, you know that if you need your ID to do all of these things, that you will need your ID to vote. We could definitely take the racist stigma off of this if people just stop believing in it. But, one person at a time, one step at a time, one video at a time. You know how it is, guys. But let me know what you thought about this in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe when we're at the door. Till next time, you guys, I'm out of here. Peace.